Okay. Hey there, hey there, hey there, everyone. Y'all, for those of us
Y'all.
in the South. Well, we're talking about Georgia. I spent time in Nashville, welcome to, yeah, Chad gave me a thumbs up. Welcome to week 5. Can you believe it, Chef? It's week 5.
I know. That's almost halfway through.
It's crazy. Madness, people. And we were also just talking right before Chef showed up that it's Wednesday, at least for those of us not in archive land. And it feels like it's like Sunday of the end of the week already. It's been a long week for everyone involved here. Hi, y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Again, week 5, we don't want to stop the momentum, so let's keep going. I saw some good stuff on Flatbread Chef. I don't have anything to share. I guess I have to start doing that. I should. But
I like all the different toppings. Those are fun to see what people decide to put on top. It's also fun to see how thick people decide them, to make them, like thick or thin, thick or thin. So it's kind of fun. It's like an expression.
Yes,
I like it.
That, and I've had a whole number of you guys out there, besides feeding your families with flatbread and pizzas, have done more than one, not just the gluten-free and the flatbread. That's like, oh, I'm going to do a bunch of different toppings, so I'll expand on the recipe and we'll have some fun with the topping part. So yeah, that's cool. I like that. We still need to work on our menu descriptions, y'all. Working on that. But your executions and Francisco's cracking up. Your execution and your final outcomes have been doing really well. So I'm the
quick question. My focaccia is really thin, and I'm used. I'm a pizziola. I make pizza, and but I noticed in the video, which I loved in Italy, it was like an inch thick. And I was saying I was at the Cab Farmers Market, and I was like looking. We can't take pictures there because there's a lot of foreigners, but their focaccia was like an inch and a half. And
there's all different size focaccias.
What is the proper size for focaccia?
Well, so there isn't a proper size for focaccia. Like all throughout Italy, depending on where you are, the sizes vary dramatically. Like I've gotten focaccia that's like, can you see that? Can you see? I can't tell where my camera is. Like that big. It's like good inch and a half. I've even had it bigger, super fluffy, like just crazy. And then I've had one of my favorite focaccias, which I can't think of what it's called, but it's super thin. And I have a video of it, and if I can find it, of this woman making it, and she spreads it so thin, like they just take this great big dough and they whip it out over this big, huge pot, so thin that you can see through it. And then they put a bunch of this really melty kind of cheese on top of it. And then they spread out another big thin piece right on top of that. And then they bake it. And the finished product is like super, super skinny. And it's like crunchy. And then you have this gooey cheese in the middle. It's like not like any other focaccia that we think of here in America. We think there's like one kind of focaccia, but there really isn't. And that stuff is like addictive. They put signs, how we do here in the donuts. What's the donut place that
Krispy Kreme?
Yeah, where they put like hot donuts and you go in and get hot donuts. So that's what they do with this.
Their stock, so.
But like they do this with that type of focaccia in Italy. It's like when it's hot, people go in and get it. It's so good. So I would say there is no set answer at all.
Well, that video was amazing. I watched like the French bakers going at it. It was really good. But the other thing too was the video was great because you mentioned my olive oil. That was actually an emulsion because it was olive oil, water, and salt, which they did in the video. And I said, I'm doing this.
Yeah. For those of you, I'm not sure, Chef Stein, if I sent you that link to the video. I sent out a video of this expert focaccia maker to my class.
I think I had that one. I did post one of, and I can't remember now which one. Oh my God, I don't think it's Naples, but it's one of the regional focaccias. So it's kind of like what you were talking about, but I don't think I sent out that one.
Yeah.
He was amazing. I mean, just an expert. Because he said like, I go outside, I look at the sky and see how my skin feels. That's how I'm cooking today.
Yeah.
And I believe
I loved that. Yeah, I love that.
Because some days when I was making pizza, I go, what the hell? What's going on in the atmosphere? Because my pizzas rising, and I was
Yeah.
very good at it. I
Yeah.
fail on practice though, but
It's very interesting though, that you picked up on that part of the video, because that was one of my favorite parts of the video, where he was explaining how experiential it is to make bread. You know, that it's you have to be present in the moment, and every day changes, and what you did yesterday won't be what you do today. And you do have to pay attention to how your skin feels and how moist it is and how damp it is from the humidity. And so I thought that was a beautiful way of putting it.
Or barometric pressure. And I go, Camille, what's happening? My dough's not rising. Everything's dying.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Everything just like puffed up. So
yeah.
Awesome.
Well, let's move into bread. Since we're talking about bread, let's just carry on. I'm gonna get my little presentation I have for you. We're gonna jump right into bread. We already have talked about it, so some of this will be a bit of a review and some of it won't, but that's okay. It's always good to talk about things several times. What do they say? You got to talk about it how many times? Like, I don't even remember, a lot of times before you remember it. So can you guys see this? You all disappeared from my screen. So let me move you back to my screen so I can see you. Okay. So we talked about yeast doughs already, and we went through this idea that there are 3 kinds. We're doing lean breads, right? We did a lean bread last week, and we're going to do a lean bread again, but it's just a reminder of what it is. So the lean bread, of course, doesn't have this extra fat and sugar or eggs or any of those things that the other doughs have, the rich doughs and the rolled in or the laminated doughs. We went through these 12 steps to bread production already last time, a little bit more in detail. And what I wanted to do today was just sort of to refresh your memory again on these 12 steps by taking you through your recipe that you're going to make today, or not today necessarily, but this week. You're making French bread. So I thought we would just go through these 12 steps together with this particular recipe. So step 1 is scaling your ingredients. I will say that I have noticed that this has been off for some people. So do pay attention to this when you're scaling. It's again by weight. I have the grams because that's what I'm comfortable using, but I think the recipe might also be is it in grams or is it in ounces? I have to look it up. But I use grams because I find it to be much easier than ounces. But so really make sure that you've scaled it properly. Again, if you need these other amounts, you can just write them down real quick. If you are planning on using active yeast or fresh yeast, you can write that down. So active would be 12.5 and the fresh would be 25 grams if you plan on doing that. And again, what's the difference between the active and the instant yeast? Anybody can just yell it out.
The strength.
The strength for sure. And what else?
you got a bloom active
Yes.
instance.
Yeah.
One
Right,
is
so
instant, one's not.
Yeah, so instant is the one that you don't have to bloom, and it has the most strength. So of the two. So you'll see here you can get away using 10 grams of instant yeast versus 12.5 grams of active yeast. You need more active because it's not as strong. And you do need to bloom it, which means you need to put it in water. And I've noticed that they never really mention this when they talk about blooming it. And I think they have talked about it a couple times in the recipes. But I always put a little pinch of sugar in there too. I find that I always have sugar in in all of my bread recipes, just a little bit, not much, but I like to feed that yeast first. So I put the water in there with the yeast, a little pinch of sugar. That's what I do. Okay, so Tom, did you have a question before we go?
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
you did.
You
You're okay.
I don't feel like I used enough yeast, and it might have been dying. I did see it blooming, but it wasn't like foaming. But it said 3 grams of active. Should I measure it or weigh it?
Well, it's hard to weigh it on a scale, depending if your scale isn't that great. You know, that's kind of a problem with the scales. In a commercial setting, you're using more than 3 grams. It's going to be easier to measure 3 grams.
Yeah.
So I find it to be a little bit tricky to measure that out. I think 3 grams is like
a half a
5 grams. 5 grams, 5.3 or something is a teaspoon. So it's a little.
Well, there
over
definitely there wasn't a half a teaspoon in there. And I thought the same thing. I'm not measuring drugs here, so
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
it is
not.
a little tricky.
I didn't think it looked good, so I will convert it and do the teaspoon method in the future.
Yeah, for this small amount, I think it's a little tricky to do that to make sure you get it right. And frankly, it's not going to be that big of a deal if you're talking about a half a teaspoon versus 3/4 of a teaspoon in this small amount. It'll work out. Also, even if you didn't use enough yeast in the beginning, yeast is alive, remember, so it will eat things and multiply. So if
Yeah.
you're finding that maybe it's not fermenting and rising the way you want it to be because you maybe didn't have enough yeast in there, you can like ferment it in the refrigerator. So it slows down the fermentation and gives them more time to multiply. And you can also add a little bit of sugar in there for them to eat. I mean, you could do a longer fermentation is what I'm saying. You can leave it in the fridge for like 2 days maybe, and see. A lot of times, especially with sourdough breads, they don't use a lot of yeast. I mean, really in the percentage wise, we haven't really talked about formulas and baking, but when you talk about baking, everything is a ratio. So it's like off of how much flour is in there. If flour is 100%, we can talk about this tomorrow in study hall. We can go through what formulas are, but if you're talking about ratios, it might be like 2.5 or percent of yeast to flour. And in a sourdough, it doesn't have a lot. It relies on that longer fermentation sometimes. So it's okay. Don't panic. And even if you did add more yeast, it would be okay. I mean, we're not talking about, this is a very quick ferment. So having a little bit more yeast in it would be fine. Having not enough yeast is fine. You just have to let it ferment longer. Hopefully that makes sense.
And it definitely fermented, and the dough did double. So I was happy with that. But I just was concerned because I think I just rolled it so thin. I was expecting like an inch, and I got like a half an inch. But one more question, since we're on it, how long do you need to knead your dough?
Well, that also depends on what you do. So I'm not trying to be like, not give you a straight answer, but it depends on how you personally knead the dough. Are you kneading it by hand or are you kneading it by machine? Because obviously a machine would be faster than if you knead it by hand. So if by hand, it's maybe 10 or 15 minutes. By machine, it could be 5-7 minutes. Yeah.
Well, I mix it, but then I was doing the hand thing, like, they were showing in class, which I've always done. But I think I only did for like 10 minutes, but the dough looked incredible. But
yeah. And I think also if you let it sit too, again, these particular lean breads are pretty forgiving, these two. So I feel like you don't have to get it exactly right and still get a pretty good bread in the end. I think when people really get into bread baking, it's like down to the particulars of things, and that is fun to do. But for what we're doing, we just really are interested in understanding the process of making bread. So if it isn't exactly perfect, I'm okay with that. I want you just to understand sort of what do you do to make bread and understand what's going on in the process so that you can troubleshoot. Joanna, do you have a question? You're on mute. If you want to take yourself off mute, you can ask your question. There you are. Oh,
sorry, he fell out chair. But my question, I was making pizzas tonight, and this was my second go round. I made a couple pizzas, and I noticed that if I let the dough, like I made maybe like 2 pieces, and I had let some of the dough. Well, I said dough. The dough sit out. And it wouldn't stretch back out like how it would when it was fresh out of, once I pushed the air out of it. It wouldn't stretch. It started, making holes and stuff like that. I was wondering if that's from letting it sit out, and what would you do once you make the dough perfectly? Once you make the dough perfectly, do you wrap it up right after? I mean, if you're not going to use it immediately, or how do you prevent it from crusting up a little bit?
Yeah, you have to keep it covered. If it's sitting out, it'll form like a skin on the top of it. And when you try to roll that out, it does kind of rip and tear where the skin is formed over the dough that should be soft. So just keep it covered. That's all you have to do. But if you're not going to use it right away, you need to put it back in the fridge because you want to stop the fermentation. You don't want it to keep proofing.
Okay, so when you put it, so what I did was I put a little spray butter on there. I put a little flour on my hands and I put it back in a bowl to sit because I thought maybe if it rests a little bit longer that it would soften back up, which it did. One in particular was a little bit harder to do, and I couldn't really get.
Yeah, that skin doesn't really go away once it's there. You could spray it with a little bit of water, and or just get some on your hands a little bit and try to soften up it's almost like forming a little crust, you know. Tom, do you have a question?
Well,
or
the
a
best
thought?
thing to do is to remold it. Just pulling it on itself, and those hard edges go back inside and get moist. And most people just, you know, they'll put the dough out, they'll spray it with like coating and just let it sit in, you know, regular temperature, and it doesn't crust. And sometimes you'll put plastic on top too, but when you got the crusty dough, that's just old dough. You want to just roll it back in.
I always like to spray it first a little bit. Like usually you'll have like a mister, you know, just like a little squirt bottle set to a nice mist spray. And I like to mist it a little bit before I would reshape it. I feel like it softens it up and lets it get back in a little bit better. Because it's just basically dried out, you know.
Yeah, that's what it is. But I don't use Mister. I use Pam or something like that. You know, a spray coating, because it'll form a seal.
Oh yeah, before you let it sit, you mean, instead of using like something else to cover it.
Because we'll leave it overnight.
Yeah,
and just let it sit there and, you know, rise.
Yeah,
proof. That's the word.
Yeah, I got what you're saying. We know. Okay. All righty. Let me make sure no one else has a question. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so now we're on to step 2, and that's mixing it. This dough is fun because it doesn't require a lot of kneading. I don't know if anyone's looked at the recipe yet and watched the recipe video yet, but you'll notice that there's not a lot of kneading going on. So I think somebody had a question about a no kneading dough, I think last week, and this is pretty close to that. It's not as highly hydrated as some of the other ones are, but we're really just we're not going to do very much kneading here, which would be in this section here for the mixing the dough. So you're going to put it in the bowl and you're going to put all the ingredients in there and just mix them up. You can do this by hand, or you can just do it with your bowl scraper. You can do it with a wooden spoon. You can mix it with that fancy whisk. What's that whisk, Chef Stein, that's like that flat? You know what I'm talking about? It's like wooden handle, I think it's Swedish. It's like a dough whisk. You ever seen that?
Yeah, I have no idea. I have no idea what the name is, but you're right.
It's like a flat, I'll have to look at that. Anyway, you can do it with that guy.
It's like 3 different circles that.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. I don't have one, but my friend has one and she loves it. She thinks it's fantastic. Anyway, you can mix it with that thing, whatever that magical thing is called. And but basically we're just trying to combine all the ingredients until they get to what's called a shaggy dough first. And it's called a shaggy dough because it looks like a shaggy dough, right? It's not together. And that's actually the official term, a shaggy dough. Mix that together and then just sort of fold it on itself, and you'll get a cohesive kind of dough. It's not going to be smooth. It's not going to be beautiful like when you knead it and you knead it and you knead it. That's it. That's all you have to do. So then we're going to set it aside to do the first fermentation. I put in here too, we talked about this last week, but it's just a reminder of what this step is doing. So we're forming the dough, we're developing the gluten and distributing the yeast. That's what we're doing in this mixing dough phase. Then we move on to the bulk fermentation. Sometimes people just call it a fermentation, and that's just letting it rise. And again, that's when the little guys are going to town, eating and producing carbon dioxide and alcohol. This is where you get all the flavor from. It's where you're getting a lot of structure from. Remember that in order to get gluten, you have to just add water to the flour. Then it starts to develop gluten on its own without you even kneading anything. It's already just developing it on its own, but it will, by just sitting there and not even you doing anything, the magic happens and it becomes smoother and more elastic all on its very own. And if you look at the dough, if you try to stretch it and pull it up from this phase, like you remember when you guys did the window pane, even if you tried to stretch this up and take a piece and pull it up at this stage versus after it's fermented, you would be amazed, do it when you're making this, at how little effort you put into it and how much it changes from this stage until after fermentation. It's pretty impressive what happens without you doing anything at all. Okay, next step was folding, or sometimes it's called punching or folding the dough. And you basically are just literally gently punching it down or folding it over on top of itself. And there's some pictures here on the right. You just start here, right? You just are always pulling it one side and folding it over itself. And then take the other side and fold it on itself. That's how you fold. It's very basic, very common sense. You'll notice in this photo too, this brush is just to brush off any excess flour. Again, you're not trying to add extra flour. I noticed too that your instinct is you're like, oh, it's a little sticky. It's not quite right. I'm going to add more flour to it. Resist the instinct unless it's like really, really super sticky and kind of mushy. Then you probably have added too much water or not enough flour, but it will be a little sticky. And the more you work it here, you fold it a couple times, do this fold just once or twice, you'll be fine. And then you'll be good to go because we're going to do another bulk fermentation. So it's 2 fermentations this time in the beginning. So you're kind of going 4 and then going back to 3. Okay, then you're going to cover though this time, and you could stop here for the day. So this week you could do this in 2 days, or you could do it in 1 day. 1 day is just going to take you some more time. So you could start it in the morning if you had a significant amount of time, because you have to let it ferment the second time for another 3 hours. So we've already got at least 4 hours into it after this stage, right? Or if you want to do it overnight, you could just pop this into your fridge and then come back to it the next day. So you could stop here and then start again. So hopefully that might help. I don't know what your guys' schedule is, but that's a good little tip. Okay, so now we're just going to scale it, moving on to step 5, which just means to measure it out into proportions. So what I would say to do, the recipe called for, I think it said it made 2 loaves, which
Yes.
are 2 bigger French bread loaf styles, rather than like a baguette, which is a skinnier loaf. So I noticed in the recipe that in the video that he had you measure out, it called for 250 grams to scale 250 grams for a loaf. But then it left this weird little amount of dough here. So why don't you just weigh your dough on the scale, the total amount you have, and then you can divide that into 2 and make 2 loaves. Or if you want to make smaller loaves, that's fine. You know, I don't mind what size you want to make, but you can just do it that way rather than shooting for this 250 grams. That way you don't end up with a weird small amount. So use your bench scraper to cut it. It's a nice and easy way to cut it, and weigh it so that you all get even amounts. The 6th step is to round it. I think in the video too, he did a good job of showing you how to round it and using the surface of your bench, your counter, to kind of pull the dough towards you. And you're making like a outside tighter kind of envelope around your dough by rounding it. So you kind of pull the dough around it underneath and make a seam on the bottom, and then you kind of scoot it on the bench towards you. Well, some people do it away from them, but usually I see people kind of pulling it on the bench and using the resistance of the bench to make that outside tighter. And you're really doing that to make it's sort of starting to tell the dough that you have this shape coming down the road. So you're going to make these little round balls, and then you're going to bench them again, which is the next step. Benching is just to letting them sit there on the bench. It's very technical. The bench is your counter. So you let them rest, and that's letting the gluten relax, because again, if you don't, your gluten is going to pull everything back up and it's going to fight you. So if you don't let it rest, you will not be able to easily form it in the next step. which is makeup or panning. And again, this is to make the actual shape of your loaf or prepare to put it in a pan, that type of thing. That's why it's called makeup and panning. If you find that when you're making these loaves that they are not cooperating and they're shrinking back up, just let it rest, put the towel back over it and let them rest a little bit longer so that they don't fight you so much. So you'll want to roll those up. Now, I also think it's pretty hard to explain to you how to roll these up, but he does a good job in the video. So please watch the video. You need to fold it over and press the seal with the heel of your hand usually. So you fold it over on top, make it into like a loafy shape, and then you fold one side over and push it down in the middle and seal it, and then fold the other side over and push it down and seal it. You're doing basically kind of another fold, but in this longer shape of that the final loaf is going to be in. So you do want to do that and kind of strengthen up and make this nice taut kind of outside by doing that motion of pressing it in and sealing the seal. If you don't press down on the seal well enough, it's going to pop up and you're going to end up with these folds in your final bread. So make sure that you watch that video. It's pretty forgiving, this bread, but just watch it and make sure that you have a good idea on how to do that. You're going to let it proof now, which again is the same thing as fermentation. We just call it proofing when they are in their shape. So at this stage, we're going to let it ferment some more and do its final rise. So at this point, it should double in size, and then you will be ready to go. And this is an important part. You need to know how to know if your bread is proofed enough. So obviously we can look at it. We can see that it's doubled in size. There's the poke test, which is the best way of doing it. So poke it, and it will gently bounce back at you, but your indentation should stay there. That means that it's ready to go. If you push your finger in there and it doesn't leave anything in there, that means you need to proof it a little bit more. And if your fingerprint never ever goes away, you've probably overproofed it, and you should get that in the oven right away. So this little poke test is a very simple, easy way for you to understand, besides the visual of how big it's gotten, if it's ready to go into the oven. So I'm going to stop for a minute. Everybody with me? The poke test is really easy way to know, and that's a really important step. Jonathan, you have a question?
Yeah, so if I were to make the dough, say tomorrow, would it be better to refrigerate it for a couple of days or freeze it for a couple of days if you're gonna like finish it on, say, Saturday?
I would freeze it. This dough would probably be okay if you refrigerated. It's going to continue to ferment in the refrigerator. It won't stop, like it doesn't become inactive unless it's 40 degrees or below. So if you're going to do it in a couple days, it's probably okay. But any longer than that, it will get a very acidic flavor to it. You know, that heavy fermentation flavor. So I would freeze it if you're going to do it many, many days. But if you're going to do it in like 2 days, it's okay. And also, I forgot to tell you, if you're going to do it in the refrigerator overnight, take it out and let it come to room temperature before you start working with it. Just cover it on the counter with some plastic wrap or your damp towel and let it come to room temp.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And that was good, because I don't know that we talked about freezing dough, but freezing dough is a great solution. It really is a really good solution. So just make sure that it's wrapped really well, regardless if you refrigerate it for a period of time or you're freezing it. Tom?
Wrap the ball itself or the bowl?
Wrap the ball itself. If it's in the refrigerator, just wrap I kind of always set it. This is what I do. And I don't know, maybe I'm being neurotic, but I get my little piece of, I don't know, I am neurotic sometimes. I get a little plastic, my little plastic sheet, and I spray that with, whatever, Pam, what is the word for those spray?
Non-stick spray.
Yes, nonstick spray. So I spray that real lightly, and then I kind of press it inside the bowl on top of it, and then I'm good. Or
Perfect.
if you have a container, which is what I normally do because I'm making more than one ball, I would just put it in a container that has a lid and put it in the fridge and not worry about it.
Cool. Thank you.
Tom? Yeah.
Dang, can you overproof bread?
Yes, you can overproof bread.
What-
So
what-
what's
what's the
happening?
effect?
Let's think about this. So what do you think is happening if it's overproof?
It
What's happening in
expands too
proofing?
much.
Hmm?
It expands too much.
But what's going on inside of it?
Well, you're building honeycombs and CO2 and all that stuff and alcohol.
Yeah, so the yeast is eating, right? The yeast is
Oh.
alive and it's eating. So it only has so much food. So if it eats and eats and eats and eats and eats, right? Then what's going to happen is the structure of your dough will start to fall back in when it's baked, if it's overproofed.
Well, I've seen too where there's like big holes in bread.
Yeah.
What is that? Just over.
That's a mixture of things. That could be a lot of things. If you ever watched them do all these experiments, it's really fun because sometimes you'll get we haven't talked about autolyse, which is a phase where at the very beginning where you just mix flour and water together. That's it. Let it sit for like 30 minutes and that starts to form the gluten and it cuts down on your kneading. And even by doing just an autolyse to your dough, and that you do it one on one bread and not on the other, and then the other, it won't have those great big holes. Or it's really fascinating, all of the things that could happen to cause all of the things. So it could be the amount of yeast, it could be your technique, it could be how long you proofed it. It could be the temperature you proofed it in. Bread is kind of finicky. You have to treat it like a lovely little baby in your room and, keep it where you'd want to keep it. But
Well-
speaking of that real quick, I want to show you something.
With pizza, you get the air bubbles. You gotta
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean,
What's-
people
what's-
dock
what's-
them to
what's the
prevent that.
tool? What was that tool last week? I can't remember.
The docking tool, a little rolling docking tool.
Yeah, docking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I use that all the time. I really do.
Yeah. I
'Cause
made
get
up this.
1-inch pizza.
Yeah. So I made up this, this table is in your book, in your textbook, but it's kind of hard to find. So anyway, I just put it in a Google Doc for you guys. And I put it on my class page. I'm sure Chef Stein's going to put it somewhere on his class page. Mine is just right underneath the archives, the live session
saved it.
archive.
I saved it
So-
in my docs.
So anyway, like the other stuff, like I want you to be able to get up and go, oh, okay, I made this bread and here it's got too much volume. It got too big, right? So look at all the options you have of things that could have gone wrong, right? So every time there's an issue with your bread, it's a little difficult to pinpoint one thing unless you're the bread maker yourself and you know exactly what you did. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint these because you've only made the dough one time. And so you don't know what it's supposed to do. You don't know, right? And so you might have to make it again. But this will give you a good starting point to at least go, okay, I have these great big holes. What could it be? It could be too much yeast. It could be too much liquid. Let's go back and check those measurements. Did I do that right? Right?
Or
It could
might-
be,
might
right?
clump up.
Yeah. So this is, I think, hopefully a really good resource for you guys, so that you can maybe start to look in there and review what you did. And I really encourage you when you're writing your narrative to put in there how it went. Like, oh, okay, I made this time, even if you do it a couple times, and this is what happened. And I think maybe this is what I did wrong, right? And then you can talk about it with us in the narrative, and then we can read what you've done, because you can tell us, okay, I went back and thought about it, and I feel like I did these things right. So maybe it was this stage, you know, and this gives us clues too to help you, because we aren't standing there with you, but we can look at what you tell us on the narrative, and we can look at the photos, and we can try to help figure out too what went wrong. But with bread, I will be honest, it's pretty tricky without seeing you right there. We have some clues of what it could be, but we need your input to tell us what it probably was. Does that make sense?
It does. And you know,
Okay.
like I said earlier, I'm a programmer. If you make mistakes, you know what's going wrong.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good thing to make mistakes, because then you learn from them. Yeah.
Well, I learn from every mistake. But my second
Yeah.
question, real quick.
Sure.
I noticed I posted a YouTube video from a French bakery that's just incredible. But they have these pans. They have like these V-shaped pans for their baguette.
The couche. Yeah.
Is our baguettes just gonna fall apart, or how do we do that?
Now
No,
here, I'm gonna
that's
show,
okay.
let me, I'm gonna grab the bus for a second. So
Yeah,
you guys
you're gonna-
have this assignment slideshow in my thing, and I know Chef Kelly's got it too. Two things here. If you click on this, you're gonna get all the pictures that we're gonna go through in a minute. And they're a little different than yours, Chef Kelly, but I have both yours and mine up there. And then
Okay.
this is what I want you guys to look at. Come on. Right there. If you click on this one right here, this YouTube video for shaping, this is exactly what this is. This is one of the best baguette shaping, and it follows along and marries exactly what you saw in the Scoffier video and what Chef was talking about, folding it. And I'm not going to play it because they don't want us to play videos during our little live sessions here. But it's about making that rectangle. It's about folding it over, using that palm of your hand to be able to seal it, folding it again, doing it, rolling it into that baguette shape with the points on the ends, letting it proof again. And then when you go to use a very, very sharp knife or a lame, this is a lame right down here. I used to have one. I don't have mine anymore, but I have extremely thin filleting knives I use because they're thin and extremely sharp. You want that to look like this. You want long, thin scores going on an angle like that. And I don't do a lot, depending how big your loaf is. It really depends, but 3 or 5 at the most kind of thing that's kind of going on. There's a couple sets. I've got 2 of them here, but this is one of them. Oops. This is one set of what does look really good of what we want you to do. And so these are all the stages of what's happening that Chef went over exactly. And again, you can see here that after it's benched, you're going to roll it into that baguette, try to get those tapers, those long, thin, and then cut it. And we need to see, please, 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 don't take it from the top. Take it on an angle. We really need to see that crust and crumb to see what the yeast development, the gluten development has done and all of that. This will not fall apart on you. If you do the shaping correctly, well, if you do the shaping in any form like this and kind of go through the steps and let all the fermentation happen, this is it. I know the couche and the pans and the cloths that you guys are talking about. If I'm in a commercial bakery like Chef Kelly was, or we're doing 1 billion baguettes at a time, sorry for my exaggeration, I'm going to help form those, especially with couche and things like that. If I'm doing 2 of them like you guys are, there's no pans involved here. You got to practice your shaping along the way. I've said this before, your first 100 baguettes are going to look horrible when you shape them by hand. It takes time and practice to be able to kind of get that done. But this is your chance to kind of start doing that hand shaping along the way.
Yeah, those are great pictures. I don't know if I have to look and
You're
see if I
in
have those ones too.
that slide presentation, Chef, the red
Okay.
one. There's a link right there. It says there's a link to it. So in my class, you've got that slide presentation. You've got Chef Kelly's slide presentation. You've got her pictures, my pictures, and that troubleshooting guide all near the assignment like Chef was talking about.
Yeah, we got lots of resources. And baguettes are longer and skinnier. So, you can make a French loaf bread that is not long and skinnier. There's different sizes. This just says French bread. So tell me what you want to make in your narrative and then make it. If it doesn't quite turn out, that's okay. We'll learn from what you did. So if you're wanting to go for that baguette, it's going to be a longer, skinnier amount.
I've done mine when I've done this recipe and when I do other ones, because this is not my particular recipe, but Like Chef, I highly recommend you let this go overnight. From a flavor standpoint, from a fermentation standpoint, exactly what Chef said, cover it, put it in the fridge. I pulled mine out. It's going to be a good 3 to 4 hours to get back up to room temperature and do that second fermentation to get ready to then roll it into balls and bench it and go through the rest of it.
You know, I saw this guy, speaking of putting it in the refrigerator, that I just remembered when you were saying that. I thought was really clever. So he, instead of putting it in a bowl and putting like parchment over the top of it, if you don't have a lidded container that you can put it in, he put it in a big stock pot and had put the lid on.
Ooh.
Which I thought was so clever.
If you can fit that in your fridge.
I know, I mean, not a huge stock pot, but like a pot
Right.
that has a lid, which I thought was really clever, because a lot of us will have a pot that has a lid. So then we can stick that in.
That's an awesome
I
idea.
totally, yeah, I forgot about that until you were talking.
But like Chef said, like, you know, we always had the Cambro plastic, like rubber and plastic containers at the restaurants where, because we were like you, well, you did it more than I, but we always had more than one bread going at one point because we always had different.
Well,
bread.
and those Cambros are these clear, they're clear containers. They come in square shapes, round shapes. Anyway, the nice thing is that they have measurements on the side, so you can easily see when your dough is proof.
Exactly.
You know, so it's really, they're really lovely. They're really nice to use. Kind of pricey, but they're well worth it. They're kind of indestructible. So let's keep going. Sorry for all of my sniffling this today. Hope it's not bothering you. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. Okay, so on to baking. So we've proofed and now we're going to bake it. So we just talked about this is what Chef was telling you just a second ago. Using a sharp knife, a fillet knife is a really great idea. You can use your paring knife too. Those are usually, but you got to make sure they're really sharp. So if they're not really sharp, it's going to drag the dough rather than slice through the dough, and then you won't get this nice little presentation at the end. And I like to hold them at a 45-degree angle. I noticed that a lot of times people go straight up and down into the bread, which if you were using a lamb, you would. I have a picture because it's hard to explain. Do you see how they're doing this here? See how it's at a 45-degree, it's like not straight up and down. And the reason that you want to do that is because you're getting the cut underneath the bread, underneath the top of it. And when it bakes off, it bakes and makes these beautiful little ears, they're called. These little, let's see if I go down here. They made all beautiful shapes out of the same bread in this article, which I think is beautiful. But you see these little things here on the side are called the ears when they stick up. And you get a really significant one. This one's pretty good. You see how that one's sticking up? It's because you've got your lamb and you're cutting it at that 45-degree angle and it's going underneath the top of the bread. So if you can do it, do one on one loaf and do one in a different, like try it out. If you're going to do 2 loaves, score them differently and see what happens. If you're up for it, if you're not, that's fine too. But you can play with the scoring, but you also, I think it's important that Chef said, you're not going straight across. It's not horizontal cuts. They're at an angle. Okay, so you make sure that that is important. Let's see, thought somebody had a question. Tom, you have a question?
Sorry. You
No, it's
showed
okay.
the thing that look like leaves, the bread with leaves.
Oh yeah. Yeah, aren't those beautiful? These,
what is that called?
aren't they gorgeous?
Well, I served them.
Yeah, they're so pretty. And I love this technique of actually using the scissors, which I thought was really, right? You're just cutting it and flipping one over the other. That's all you're doing. Cut it, move it to one side, cut it, move that one to the other side.
What's
Are they pretty?
the name?
Oh, here, epidouble.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah, it means a wheat stalk, I think, or something like that.
Where?
But aren't they pretty? Oh,
Oh.
here's where it's written, right here.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we serve those a lot here. We have 3 major bakeries in Atlanta. So
Yeah, but this is how they did it here, which I thought was a nice little, it shows you exactly, you cut it. You can't cut all the way through, obviously, or you will not
well,
have
we
that
would
bread.
slice it up and serve it on a plate with butter,
they-
which the chef made a huge deal about butter consistency.
Well, everybody has their thing, you know.
I know.
You gotta like just say, yes, chef, that's a great idea, and then move on. Okay, so baking. baking. So in commercial ovens, you know, they usually have steam ovens. So we're at home and we don't have a steam oven. It's okay. You don't have to add steam, but it's nice if you can add steam. So why would we want to add steam to an oven? Anybody got any ideas why you'd even want to introduce steam to an oven?
So the bread doesn't get too dry.
Yeah, the bread doesn't get too dry too fast. It's the time thing that you're trying to control. So when your bread goes in the oven, right, the idea is that it's going to firm up to a shape, but it has what's called oven spring at the very beginning, which goes for about 10 to 12 minutes. That first 10 to 12 minutes of baking is when you can get this poof up of size. And it's the last hurrah of the yeast before they die, basically, before the internal temperature of your dough gets to 140 and your yeast dies off. You get this nice oven spring. And in order to let your bread get as big as it can get before they die off, you can't have the outside set, right? It can't get so hard and firm in the oven that it can't do the rest of its spring, right? So the idea with the steam is to keep the outside a little softer so that it can continue its way up. Tom?
You bring up a interesting question I never thought about. I use steam when I make cheesecake and macaroni and cheese. What is the effect of steam in those positions?
Well, I mean, it's the same point. You're not trying to get it crusty. It's not being helpful in a rising position. I mean, cheesecake doesn't really rise, but it keeps it from getting dried out. You don't want to get it all dried out. Are you putting it in a bain marie as well?
Yeah, yes, but
Yeah.
what it does is it makes it more custardy.
Yeah, that's from cooking in the bain marie. But if you're introducing steam on the outside, that's to keep the outside from getting crusty.
I'm basically just keeping the base hot and moist.
Well, for baking too, I mean, the whole idea is to keep it soft, let it get its full rise. And you can do that at home. What I do is put a very sturdy, you probably don't have, but you have to get some kind of a pan that can go into the oven. And I usually put it into the oven on the bottom of the oven and heat at my oven at the same time. I use a stainless steel pan, but put something in there that can hold heat, obviously, and not glass, because you're going to add water to it at the end when it's really hot and you don't want to break the glass. So put something in there that can hold up, or we'll have another method too. So first method is to put a pan in the bottom while you're heating up your oven. And when you do that, it's all hot, nice and hot. And then when you go to put your bread in, then you can put in hot water and close the door and it steams up automatically because it's hitting the hot pan and it makes steam. The other way to do it is to just add boiling water into a pan that's steaming, right? Because it's boiling. You can do that, get a kettle or something. This is more tricky because you're adding boiling water and you can burn yourself. But just be careful and pour it in, you'll be fine. It's not the end of the world. And then close the door really quick and you'll get some steam. You can also spritz the oven, but I often worry that will ruin people's oven. I don't know if it does or not, but I often think about that and I don't want anybody to ruin their oven because I told them to spritz their oven and then something happens. So you can, I don't know if it actually can cause any damage. You can also spritz the bread itself. So you could put it in the oven, spritz it, close the oven, let it go for 7 minutes, spritz it again, because remember it's that first 10 to 13 minutes, spritz it again, and then close the oven, and that will be fine too. You can also, if you don't have a little spritzer, you could just get some water on your fingertips and sprinkle it on the top. It's all okay. It's going to evaporate off. So all of those methods would be good, and all of them are not required. You will still get a very beautiful loaf of bread without doing steam. You just might get a bigger bread if you put the steam in there.
And I recommend that for pizza when you're reheating. Just spray it with a bottle and it brings life back because it brings the water. But my question too is, do you leave the pan of water in there while you're baking, or do you take it out?
I never bother to take it out. These breads don't bake that long that I worry about it.
But
some people put ice in there too.
Oh, really?
If they've heated up their pan, it's really super hot, then they just throw ice cubes in, and that makes
I use
steam.
boiling water. I make my kettle. But you know, if
Yeah, I
you're
mean, it's just a
making-
different, either way will make steam. I mean, if your pan is
Yeah.
super hot, you know.
But you know, if I'm making cheesecake, I'll take a spring form and wrap it in aluminum foil and put it in a ½ inch of water. But it's the secret to my macaroni and cheese, which is my best dish ever. So
Steam.
That's a
Thanks for
different
sharing.
technique though. Yeah, because we'll
Thanks
talk
for
about
sharing your
custard.
secret.
Yeah, we'll talk about custards next week though.
Yeah.
In a bain-marie, and that's not, you're steaming, but you're not doing, it's a totally different technique.
well, I make banana pudding all the time too. So with a double boiler.
Cool. All right, let's get going with the baking. So how do I know when it's done? It's got to be golden brown, and a deep golden brown. I often see people take it out before it's done. That's sort of a common mistake. Leave it in there till it's a deep golden brown. When you pick it up, it should feel light because all of the water has evaporated out of it, correct? So it'll be lighter. It loses 15% of its weight. Well, 10 to 15% of its weight, somewhere around there, when you bake, because that water has evaporated off. If you knock on the bottom of it, like who's home, then it will sound hollow. If it sounds muffled, then you should bake it a little bit longer. So those are all like little tips. So you want to make sure that those things are occurring. Then we want to cool it. You definitely want to cool it on a rack or somewhere that you can let it cool all around. Then it's important to let it cool before you cut it. If you cut it before it's cool, sometimes it looks gummy and sometimes it looks unbaked. It's going to continue to do its last little baking and harden up while it's cooling. So make sure that you at least let it cool for 30 minutes. I mean, that's like on the short end, but I know you want to cut into it because it's such a delicious smelling thing when you're looking at it. But you really should let it cool. And then you're going to store it. We talked about storing last week too, I think. But you can just leave it uncovered if you haven't cut into it yet. If you cut into it, just turn it face down. So cut side down on a board, and it'll hold that. Keep it nice and fresh if you've cut into it. Other than that, you need to wrap it up in some plastic or foil. The crust will get soft if you wrap it up in plastic. You can pop it back in the oven and harden that back up and kind of refresh it and bring it back to life. You can freeze it when it's already baked off. And that's it. You don't want to refrigerate it, obviously, because that increases staling. So those are all the steps. We went through them again, but this time we went through them with a recipe. And I think you guys have already done this once. We didn't really do all the bulk fermentations that we do in this particular one. And we have more shaping that you need to pay attention to this week. But you've done the other steps. And so it's very similar. And I think you've set yourself up from last week for this week that you should be able to start now working on that shaping and go from there. So how does everybody feel? Do you feel like you're ready to make bread? Do you have other questions? I haven't been looking at the chat. I'm sure Steph Stein is answering questions.
We got it. No, they seem to be good. Nothing too major like we were talking about.
Okay.
Give yourself the time to let this dough do what it needs to do. It's like Chef said, it's less kneading and a lot of watching, and it's a lot more giving it its time to do that fermentation through all the steps. That's going to be your biggest time constraint. I also I'm going to say it again, I highly recommend letting it go 12, 14 or more hours in the refrigerator from a flavor standpoint.
You could also do one of each and just do a little testing. If you make 2 loaves, you could bake one off if you really wanted to experiment. I love experimenting if you haven't figured this out yet about me.
Yes.
So you could just see for yourself, what's he talking about? Well, let's see what he's talking about.
Exactly. Jason, before we get to you, I want to bring this up because next week is custard week and we're doing bread pudding. So you do not have to use your baguette for bread pudding. I didn't have any left when I made baguettes when I was playing around with the recipe because I ate them all. They're really good. So if you do, you can save some, you can make additional, you can make it again to practice, which is what I would recommend, or you can use other bread when we'll talk about that next week. But just know part of what we're doing here is kind of we're using some stuff. The other thing is we're going to be doing Oh no, we're not doing it this time. We were doing hors d'oeuvres last block. We're not doing it this block, so we don't need crostinis or things like that. But that's one use if you have any leftover or if you want to make your bread again.
Who has leftover bread?
There is no such thing.
No, I would eat it all.
Jason has a
Yummy.
question.
This is for the overnight storage. I have Tupperware bowls, Rubbermaid Tupperware bowls with tops. Is that something that I can sit the dough in overnight to continue the fermentation?
Mhm.
Okay,
I usually leave one of the little, I don't tightly secure it.
just leave one of the ends slightly open.
Yeah, just it's making gas, and I don't know. I always think, oh, it's gonna
Pop
fill
it
up in there.
Yeah, pop it.
So-
Okay,
Make
don't
sure it's
seal it
big
completely.
enough. Yeah, make sure it's big enough also, because that dough over time will get close to doubling. It's not going to do it as quick, of course, as room temp. But I
Okay.
have seen people where, oh my God, oops, too small a container. There's now dough overflowing all over the place. So
okay,
just make sure it's large enough that it gives it at least double the volume.
okay. Thank you.
I made that mistake once. At work,
all-
I put
all
a
have.
brioche dough on the top of the proofer and totally forgot about it. I came
Oops.
back in the next day and it was like overflowing all over the top and down the side. So I never made that mistake again. There you
It's
go.
happened. Someone put the wrong size container in the refrigerator when we proofed it overnight. And yeah,
Yeah.
it decided the night of the living dead in the walk-in refrigerator.
Like the Blob. Do you remember the movie The Blob?
Yes,
Came
sir.
back.
We were talking about freezing a couple times here, so there's a couple ways. One place where I used to work, chef, is where we would do all the shaping, go through this methods of initial shaping, and then freeze those, shatter pack them, where you put them individually in a freezer, so that once they're cold and frozen, you can then put them on top of each other, so they won't stick, kind of thing. And then, like Thomas was mentioning too, we pulled them out overnight, let them proof overnight for what we needed, or proof at the beginning of the morning for the evening shift, or things like that. That's one way to do it. The other way is, like Chef was talking about, if you have leftover, or if you want to do it, you can go through the baking step, let them cool really well, and then end up wrapping them extremely well. I like the freezing them at the shaping method a little bit better, but. Questions? Thomas has a question.
Comment. I will mention, I know a restaurant or two that goes to Restaurant Depot and buys frozen pizza dough, and they set it out overnight. They just spray it, put it in the pans, and just set it out. And it's actually good pizza, but I wouldn't do it. But it's funny that Restaurant Depot sells frozen pizza dough.
Yeah. Restaurant Depot has a lot, like everything in there.
They have frozen churros you put in the oven. I can tell
Oh,
you
I
that.
know. We use them at the Braves.
Anyone else have, we've got another minute or two before we've got to at least stop the recording. Anybody have a question about anything else? Are you guys feeling, like Chef said, pretty confident? I got some head nods. Francisco's doing it. I'm not worried about him. He's fine. A lot of cameras are off, so I can't really see it. You guys are doing okay.
Well,
I've had a number of people send me pictures, emailing me as they're doing stuff, because they weren't sure enough of, like, is this right? So I'm okay, whatever I can do to help you out. I'm sure Chef's similar to that. We'd rather not have you spin wheels and things like that.
So Chef Nick and Chef Jamie insisted that we turn our cameras on because they didn't want to look at blank walls, which I liked.
I don't want to look
Yeah.
at everybody's houses personally, but yeah,
But
whatever.
I
works for you.
had to dress up. I normally don't. See my new shirt though.
So
Looking
cool,
good.
guys. Let us know if there's anything else. I'm gonna stop our recording here, but we'll be hanging out for a little while for some questions. If you haven't submitted week 4 from last week, you still have the late period, so submit. Go back and do those knowledge and conversion checks if you guys are missing any of that. Make sure you take an eye on those picture requirements for this week. They're really important. The chef and I really need to see all the steps, especially if anything goes sideways on you. I can't really diagnose things without you telling us in the narrative and showing us the pictures. So those are really important along the way. Did I miss anything else?
No, I don't think so.
And I'm going to tell my section. I mentioned this earlier really quick. I'm in Chicago over this weekend for a company retreat thing we're doing. Chef's not going. I feel so bad. I wanted to see Chef in person.
I know, it would be nice. I'm kind of glad that I wasn't able to go because now I don't feel very good. So
That's
I'd make
probably-
everybody
but
sick. So that would be bad.
I'm not going to be out of touch, but I'm not going to be as easily to get a hold of from like Friday afternoon through Sunday night. So not a big deal one way or the other. Guys, have a great weekend, or y'all have a great weekend. Tomorrow, same bat time, same bat station is our study hall. It's been a long week, as I mentioned. And Chef's got some great stuff to talk about there too for this week, and I got some good stuff coming up for the next week. So hopefully we'll see you there. Have a nice night, you guys and everybody in archive land, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. And